The New Mexico sun had no mercy. 7 in the morning and the asphalt already shimmered like liquid glass, turning the federal K-9 training complex into something that felt more like punishment than profession. The kind of heat that made your lungs work harder just to pull in air that tasted like copper and dust. Eli
Hey
Harlow's
there,
Honda
good
Civic
boy.
looked
Who's a good
ridiculous,
dog?
parked between the
Yes,
tactical
you are.
vehicles.
You're a good dog.
Suburban next to Humvee, paycheck next to
Ready?
pension.
Go!
The
Good boy,
contrast
weave.
wasn't lost on him as he
Finish
killed the
strong.
engine and
Excellent
sat there
work.
for a moment, letting the AC blow its last cool breath across his face. 39 years old, 4 days into a job he couldn't afford to lose. The rearview mirror showed him what everyone else would see, a man who looked like he'd been carved down to essentials, jaw tight beneath a beard gone silver at the temples, hair cut military short because some habits never died. Shoulders still broad, but carrying less weight than they used to, the kind of lean that came from skipping meals to make rent. His grandfather Samuel would have recognized the look. That particular brand of tired that came from fighting wars that didn't end when you came home. Eli grabbed his thermos and stepped out into heat that hit like a physical thing. The complex stretched out before him, chain link runs, training yards marked with orange cones, concrete buildings that radiated stored heat like ovens. In the distance, dogs barked in staccato bursts. Commands echoed off metal walls. Somewhere a whistle pierced the air, followed by the thunder of paws on packed dirt. This was supposed to be a fresh start. After the layoffs in Phoenix, after the months of applications that went nowhere, after the nights when he'd wondered if he'd finally run out of road. Harlow, Sergeant Dorothy Vickers, stood in the shade of the main building, arms crossed, silhouette sharp against the white stucco. 52 years old, and every inch of it earned through sweat and dog bites and never backing down. Her face had been weathered by 2.5 decades of New Mexico sun into something that looked carved from the same rock as the mountains on the horizon. Eli walked over, boots crunching on gravel. "Morning, Sergeant." She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Got your assignment." She handed him a file so thin it could have been a speeding ticket. The tab read, "Boone, Belgian Malinois, 6 years. Kennel 12, Vickers said. "Far end. He's yours now." Eli opened the file. 2 pages. The first was a basic physical description, 85 pounds, black and tan coat, amber eyes. Born 2018. Transferred from the next part was redacted thick black lines through whatever agency had sent him. The second page was a series of performance notes from 3 different facilities, each one ending the same way: failed pairing attempt. Dog lacks functional obedience. Recommend removal. At the bottom, almost lost in the margin, someone had scrawled a note in handwriting so cramped it was nearly illegible. Dog shows signs of selective response. Possible trauma-related. Recommend patience. The signature was blacked out with permanent marker. "What's his story?" Eli asked. Vickers looked at him with eyes that had seen too many dogs wash out too many handlers, quit too many budget meetings where animals became numbers on spreadsheets. "Story is he's failed 4 pairing attempts in 18 months. Doesn't track, won't sit, spooks at loud noises. Half the staff thinks he's broken. The other half thinks we should have cut our losses 6 months ago. So why keep him? Because I've been doing this 25 years, and something about that dog doesn't add up." She squinted against the glare. "File says non-military program, but it's got more redactions than a CIA briefing. No training logs, no certification trail, just a dog that moves wrong for a failure." Eli looked at the photo clipped to the file. The dog stared directly at the camera with eyes that didn't look confused or scared or any of the things you'd expect from an animal struggling to adapt. They looked calculating, alert, like someone taking your measure and filing the information away for later. "Evaluation's Friday," Vickers said. "That's your deadline. He passes or he's done. Medical retirement." Eli knew what that meant. Medical retirement was the polite term they used when euthanasia made the paperwork look bad. "Understood." Vickers turned to go, then paused. "Harlow, I read your file too. Phoenix K-9 unit, budget cuts. Good record before that." Her voice dropped just slightly. "I'm giving you the problem case because everyone else has given up. Don't make me regret it." She walked back into the building, leaving Eli standing in heat that pressed down like a hand. He looked at the file again, at the photo, at those amber eyes that seemed to see through the camera lens and into something beyond. "All right, Boone," he said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." Kennel 12 sat at the far end of the complex, separated from the others by 50 yards of empty ground. Deliberate isolation, the kind of distance you put between yourself and something unpredictable. Eli approached slowly, boots scraping concrete, giving the dog time to register his presence. The kennel was standard issue, 12 by 8 feet, chain link walls, concrete floor, shade cloth overhead. A steel water bowl sat in the corner full but untouched. Food bowl empty. The dog lay against the back wall facing away. Belgian Malinois, the breed that made German shepherds look laid back, pure working drive wrapped in fur and muscle. The kind of dog that could clear a building, detect explosives, track a runner for miles, and still have energy left to play fetch. Except this one wasn't moving. "Morning," Eli said, not loud, just present. The dog's ear twitched, that was all. Eli studied him from outside the kennel. Even lying down, you could see the lean muscle under the coat. Black saddle across the back, tan legs and chest, that distinctive Malinois wedge-shaped head. But something was off about the way he held himself. Too still, too controlled, like someone pretending to rest while staying completely alert. Eli had seen that posture before, in Kandahar, in men who'd learned to sleep with one eye open because closing both meant you might not wake up. He clipped a lead to his belt and opened the kennel door. The dog's head came up. Fast. Amber eyes locked on Eli with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. No growl, no bark, just assessment. "Easy," Eli said, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Just getting to know each other." He clipped the lead to Boone's collar. The dog didn't resist, but he didn't cooperate either. He stood there like someone tolerating an inconvenience, waiting for it to be over. They walked toward the training yard like strangers forced to share an elevator. The morning's first drill was basic formation, the kind of thing dogs usually mastered in their first week heel-stop pivot return. Officer Jake Martinez was running his German Shepherd through the same course on the adjacent field, the dog moving like it was choreographed. Perfect heel position. Instant response to every command. The kind of precision that made it look easy. Eli positioned Boone at the start line. Heel. Boone looked at him, through him, past him. Like Eli was speaking a language he'd once known fluently, but had forgotten how to translate. Then he started walking. Not at heel position, too far ahead, then drifting sideways, then stopping completely to stare at something only he could see. Boone, heel. The dog sat down in the middle of the course. Not defiance. Eli had worked with stubborn dogs before, the ones that tested every command, pushed every boundary. This was different. This was a dog who'd lost the connection between the words and the meaning, like someone with amnesia trying to remember who they used to be. Across the field, Martinez's German Shepherd executed a perfect pivot and return. "How's the project going?" Martinez called over, not bothering to hide the smirk. Eli ignored him and tried again. "Come on, buddy. I know you've got this somewhere in there." Boone stood up, took 3 steps, then sat down again, staring at the horizon with an expression that could have been confusion or could have been something deeper. Something that looked almost like grief. The scent work was worse. They set up 4 identical boxes in the center of the yard. Only one contained the target odor, a simple cocaine simulation that most dogs could identify after 2 weeks of training. Boone approached the first box, sniffed once, then walked away and lay down in the shade of the building. Officer Sarah Thompson watched from the fence line, her own Belgian Malinois sitting at perfect attention beside her. 20 years on their own, and her dog could probably run these drills in its sleep. "Still having trouble," she called over. "Working through it," Eli said. "Been working through it for 4 weeks now, haven't you?" Eli didn't answer. He walked over to where Boone lay, dropped to one knee beside him. "What's going on in there?" he asked quietly. "What are you trying to tell me?" The dog's ear twitched again, but he didn't look up. By lunch, the other handlers had gathered in the break room, and Eli could hear them through the open window. "My dog learned basic recalls in 2 days, Officer Reeves said. Young guy, maybe 26, with something to prove. What's Harlow's excuse?" 4 weeks, Martinez replied. 4 weeks, and the dog still can't track a tennis ball in an empty field. Laughter filtered out into the heat. Eli sat on a bench outside Boone's kennel, eating a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. The dog lay in the same position as before, facing the chain link wall. Not sleeping, but not quite present either. "I don't know what happened to you out there," Eli said quietly, "but whatever it wasn't your fault." Boone's ear twitched. Eli leaned back against the bench, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My grandfather had a dog once. Old Blue. Came back from Korea with him." He paused, watching the heat shimmer off the concrete. "Blue never barked at fireworks, never played fetch, never did much of anything except follow my grandfather around like a shadow. Everyone said he was broken." The dog's breathing changed slightly. Still controlled, but something shifted in the rhythm. But when my grandfather had his heart attack in the barn, Blue somehow got the neighbors' attention, led them straight to where he'd collapsed, saved his life. Eli's voice caught slightly. Sometimes the ones who look broken are just carrying weight the rest of us can't see. Slowly, so slowly, Eli almost missed it. The dog turned his head. For the first time all week, Boone looked at him. Really looked. And in those amber eyes, Eli saw something he'd been hoping for since day one. A flicker of recognition, of trust, of something that said, maybe you understand. Monday brought a different approach. Eli arrived an hour before the other handlers when the complex was still quiet and the air held that brief coolness before the sun turned everything to fire. He brought coffee for himself and extra patience for Boone. Instead of forcing drills, he scattered treats around the training area and let the dog explore. Instead of demanding perfect heel position, he walked beside him like they were just taking a morning stroll through a neighborhood that happened to be surrounded by chain link and concrete. You don't have to be perfect, Eli told him, as they meandered between orange cones that were supposed to mark an agility course. Just be you. Boone didn't transform overnight. He still ignored most commands, still spooked when someone dropped a metal bowl 3 kennels over. Still had that distant look in his eyes like he was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. But he started staying closer to Eli during water breaks, started meeting his eyes when his name was called. And this was the thing that made Eli's chest tighten, with something like hope, started positioning himself between Eli and doorways, the way a trained operator would protect a principal. Small progress, but progress. The strangest part was watching him move when he thought no one was paying attention. During breaks, Eli would catch him naturally clearing corners, instinctively positioning himself with sight lines to multiple exits. He'd pause at doorways, scan left to right in precise sectors, then enter with fluid grace that spoke of repetition, burned so deep into muscle memory it had become reflex. But the moment training resumed, that focus would evaporate, like someone who knew how to speak but had forgotten why the words mattered. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday that nobody saw coming. They were running environmental exposure drills. Basic stuff designed to get dogs comfortable with urban noise. Car horns, construction, sounds, crowd chatter, played through speakers at gradually increasing volumes. Most dogs handled it fine after a few sessions. Boone had been doing okay, tense but managing, until Instructor Wells cranked up the speakers for a simulated gunfire sequence. The first burst was barely 90 decibels, less noise than a motorcycle. But the moment those sharp staccato pops filled the air, Boone went rigid like he'd been struck by lightning. His ears flattened against his skull. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. Then he started scanning. Not looking around like a confused dog, scanning like a soldier checking for threats. His head moved in precise arcs, covering sectors, looking for something that wasn't there. Easy, Boone, Eli said, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Then Boone spun in place, growling at empty air 6 feet to his left, and bolted across the yard with a speed that made Eli's blood run cold. Boone, Eli called, sprinting after him. Boone, wait! But Boone was gone. Not just physically, but mentally. He wasn't running from the noise, he was responding to it. Following some protocol burned so deep into his brain that conscious thought couldn't override it. He crashed through an equipment gate, scattered traffic cones like they were enemy combatants, and dove under the closest vehicle he could find, a maintenance truck parked near the south fence. Eli found him there, pressed against the rear axle, whole body trembling like he was caught in an earthquake only he could feel. His eyes were wide but unfocused, like he was seeing a different place, a different time. His breathing came in short, controlled bursts, the pattern of someone trying to stay quiet while under fire. "Hey, buddy," Eli whispered, dropping to his knees beside the truck. "It's just me. You're safe." Boone didn't respond to his voice, didn't even seem to hear it. Eli didn't try to pull him out, didn't reach for the leash or give commands. He just stretched out on the gravel beside the truck and waited. One hand extended where Boone could see it if he chose to look. The sun climbed higher. Heat radiated off metal and concrete. Sweat soaked through Eli's shirt. He waited. After what felt like an hour but was probably closer to 15 minutes, Boone's breathing started to slow. His eyes gradually focused. And when they finally found Eli's face, there was something different in them. Recognition, maybe even gratitude. "There you are," Eli said softly. "Welcome back." That night, Eli sat in his apartment, a one-bedroom in a complex where the AC barely worked, and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing, staring at his laptop. He'd pulled up Boone's file again, scanning the sparse information for clues he might have missed. Under previous assignment, it just said DOD-K9 program. Under reason for transfer, administrative. But there was a notation at the bottom he hadn't noticed before, buried in small print: handler KYA. Subject requires specialized placement. Handler killed in action. Eli stared at the screen until his eyes burned. Pieces of a puzzle slowly clicking into place. Boone hadn't been transferred because he was defective. He'd been transferred because his world had been blown apart and nobody knew how to put it back together. Eli thought about his grandfather. About the way Samuel would sit in his workshop for hours, old Blue lying at his feet, both of them silent in that way that spoke of shared understanding. The way Blue would sometimes stand up in the middle of the night and pace to the door, staring out at nothing like he was standing guard over memories only he could see. The way Samuel would get up and stand with him, not trying to fix it, just being present. Eli closed the laptop and looked at the clock. 3 in the morning. In 4 hours, he'd be back at the complex. In 4 days, Boone would face his final evaluation. The deadline felt like a countdown to execution. He thought about what Vickers had said. Something about that dog doesn't add up. She was right, and Eli was starting to understand why. Boone wasn't failing to learn. He was failing to forget. Friday morning arrived with the kind of weight that made it hard to breathe. Eli pulled into the complex parking lot at 6 an hour before he needed to be there because sitting in his apartment waiting had become unbearable. The sun was just breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Beautiful in a way that felt wrong for what the day might bring. He walked to Boone's kennel. The dog was awake, sitting in the exact center of the space facing the door like he'd been waiting. "Morning," Eli said. Boone stood. There was something different in his posture today. Alert, focused, like he knew something was coming. Eli clipped the lead and they walked toward the training yard, their shadows long in the early light. That's when he heard it. The sound of tires on gravel, engines running smooth and quiet. The kind of vehicles that cost more than most handlers made in a year. 2 black Suburbans rolled through the main gate like they owned the place. No markings, no fanfare, just the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked. The instructors and handlers, who'd arrived early, gathered near the fence line, whispering among themselves as the vehicles parked in perfect formation. The doors opened with military precision. 4 men stepped out. They moved like they were still wearing uniforms, even though they were dressed in civilian tactical gear. Quiet boots, watchful eyes, the kind of stillness that came from knowing exactly how dangerous the world could be. At the center of them was a man who didn't need an introduction. He looked like he'd been carved out of granite and weathered by decades of hard choices. Broad shoulders, silver threading through dark hair, a scar along his jawline that told stories he'd probably never share. But it was his eyes that caught Eli's attention. The same distant, calculating look he'd seen in Boone. The man scanned the complex until his gaze landed on Eli. Then on the dog at his side. Sergeant Vickers appeared from the main building, moving fast. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The man nodded once. His voice carried across the yard with the kind of command presence that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "I'm Commander Nash. I'm here for Boone." The training yard went dead quiet. Eli felt his stomach drop, felt the lead in his hands suddenly heavy as an anchor. Vickers looked confused. "Boone is in the Belgian Malinois we've been working with." "That's correct." Nash's gaze found Eli across the yard. "I understand he's having some adjustment issues." "How did you even know about our dog?" "Word travels, Sergeant." Nash's voice dropped slightly. "Where is he?" Eli found himself walking forward at Boone, padding silently beside him on a loose lead. The dog had been unusually calm all morning, but now his head was up, ears forward, like he was trying to solve a familiar puzzle. Nash stopped 15 feet away and studied Boone with the intensity of someone reading a report written in a language only he understood. The silence stretched out. A crow called from somewhere beyond the fence. Heat was already building, turning the air thick. Then Nash spoke, quiet, almost gentle. "Hello, Ghost." Boone froze. Everything about the dog changed in that instant. His posture straightened, his breathing steadied, and for the first time since Eli had known him, the confusion cleared from his eyes. He didn't move from Eli's side, but everything about his body language screamed recognition. Alert, ready, home. Nash took a step forward. Boone didn't flinch. Another step. The dog remained perfectly still, but now his tail was level, his weight balanced on all 4 paws like he was ready for whatever came next. "You know me, don't you, boy?" Boone sat, clean, precise, immediate. Eli had never seen him respond to a command so quickly. Nash turned to the gathered staff, his expression serious. "We need to talk." The debrief room felt smaller with Nash in it, not physically. The space was the same 12 by 15 feet, It had always been, with the same scarred conference table and the same fluorescent lights that hummed like angry insects. But Nash's presence took up more room than his physical size should have allowed. The kind of gravity that came from years of making decisions where hesitation meant body bags. Eli sat across from him, still processing what he'd witnessed in the yard. Sergeant Vickers stood near the door like she was guarding state secrets, arms crossed. Expression unreadable. Through the window, Eli could see Boone in a temporary kennel. The dog sat at attention, facing the building, waiting with a patience that looked almost military. Nash pulled a manila folder from his tactical bag and set it on the table. The tab read, Ghost Protocol, Eyes Only. Boone wasn't supposed to end up here, Nash began without preamble. His voice carried the kind of directness that came from briefing operators before insertions. No wasted words, just facts. He was part of a joint special operations program. We called it Ghost Protocol. Eli leaned forward. Small teams, Nash continued, classified missions, surgical extractions in places that don't officially exist. The kind of work where you go in quiet and come out quieter, and if something goes wrong, nobody's coming to save you. Vickers shifted her weight. And now the program's been dissolved. Nash's jaw tightened slightly. Most of the assets were reassigned or retired through proper channels. Boone fell through the cracks. What kind of cracks? Eli asked. Nash was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding how much to reveal. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a distant quality, the sound of someone revisiting memories he'd rather leave buried. 3 years ago, we were running an extraction in eastern Turkey. High-value targets, hostile territory. Intelligence said we had maybe 20 minutes before the whole block went up. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, someone shouted a command. A dog barked in response. Boone was my partner's operator for that mission, Nash said. Lieutenant Daniel Cross, full nonverbal protocol, off-leash work. The kind of trust you build over years of working in places where a single mistake gets everyone killed. Nash opened the folder. The first page showed a photograph. A man in his early 30s, sandy hair, easy smile, standing next to a Belgian Malinois that could have been Boone's twin. The dog's tongue lolled out in what looked like a grin. The happiness in that photo felt like it belonged to a different universe. Cross and Boone had 47 missions together, Nash said. 3 years bonded. Boone could clear a room faster than most human teams, identify threats from scent alone, guide hostages through debris in complete darkness. He paused. Cross used to say Boone could read his mind. I think he was half serious. Eli looked at the photo, at the easy partnership between man and dog, the kind of connection that couldn't be faked or forced. What happened? He asked quietly. Nash's hands clenched slightly on the table. We'd extracted 4 civilians and were moving to the rally point when the charges started going off early. Not our intel failure. Someone on the inside had changed the timeline. His voice stayed level, but something darker moved behind his eyes. The structure collapsed during exfil. Cross got pinned under a concrete beam, broke his leg in 3 places, lost comms, couldn't move. The room was completely silent now. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to fade. Standard protocol was for Boone to return to the rally point and guide the backup team to Cross's location. Simple extraction. Nash looked directly at Eli. But instead, he stayed. Eli felt something cold settle in his chest. Refused every command to leave, Nash continued. Held a defensive perimeter around Cross's position for 6 hours while insurgents tried to dig them out. They came in waves, small arms fire, grenades, everything they had. Nash's jaw tightened. Boone took shrapnel from 2 different explosions, kept fighting, never made a sound, never retreated. When the rescue team finally reached them, they found him still standing guard, bleeding from 3 different wounds, holding off a group of fighters who'd been trying to finish the job. The image hit Eli like a physical blow, a dog injured and alone standing over his fallen handler in the dark, refusing to abandon the one person who mattered most. Nash looked down at his hands. Cross was already gone by the time we got there. Bled out probably 2 hours into the siege. But Boone wouldn't leave him. We had to sedate him just to get him away from the body. He tried to bite the medic, drew blood. First and only time he'd ever shown aggression toward friendlies. The silence stretched out. Heavy. Absolute. The medic said Boone had lost so much blood, most dogs would have collapsed hours earlier. But he wouldn't quit. Nash's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Not while Cross needed him. Vickers spoke for the first time, her voice rougher than usual. But he didn't die. No, Nash said, but the unit got scattered after that mission. I was transferred stateside for other assignments. Boone went to a military vet hospital in Colorado, then supposedly to a specialized handler program for dogs transitioning out of active service. He pushed the folder across the table to Eli, except someone screwed up the paperwork, listed him as unplaceable due to trauma symptoms, and shoved him into the civilian transfer system. Eli opened the folder. Page after page of transfer orders, each one stamped with different agency headers, each one missing critical information. No service record, no mission history, no handler notes, just a TA reduced to a problem that needed solving. Without his service record, Vickers said, understanding dawning. Without anyone knowing what he'd been trained to do, what he'd been through, or why he needed specialized care. He became just another failed prospect, Nash finished. For the past 18 months, he's been bounced from one facility to another, each one thinking he was a washout who couldn't cut it. Each one trying to force him into boxes that were never meant to fit what he actually was. Eli felt a cold anger building in his chest. Not the hot explosive kind. The slow-burning rage that came from watching someone suffer because of bureaucratic incompetence. All this time, he said quietly, he wasn't broken. He was just waiting. Waiting for someone who spoke his language, Nash agreed. Someone who understood that he wasn't failing. He was grieving. Eli looked out the window at Boone. The dog sat motionless in the kennel, amber eyes fixed on the building, like he was standing guard over an invisible perimeter. Still protecting, still loyal, still a warrior in a world that had forgotten what he was. So what happens now, Eli asked. Nash stood slowly. I'd like to run one final test. Something Boone will understand, something that might help you see what you're really working with. What did you have in mind? Nash's smile was sharp as a knife edge. A ghost run, like the old days. The mock village at the eastern edge of the complex looked like a movie set that had been left to weather in the desert sun. Plywood buildings with blown-out windows, concrete barriers arranged to simulate street fighting, chain-link fences marking boundaries that didn't exist. The kind of urban warfare training ground that most local K-9 units never needed to use. Nash had requested minimal observers, just Eli Sergeant Vickers and two instructors who'd promised to keep their mouths shut about whatever they were about to witness. The three SEALs who'd arrived with Nash remained on the perimeter, quiet as shadows. The sun had climbed to its apex, turning the air into something you could almost see. Heat shimmered off concrete. The distant mountains wavered like a mirage. Nash walked the course with Eli explaining the setup. This isn't about obedience, and he said. It's about instinct under pressure. One target hidden somewhere in the village. A scent signature designed to mimic human stress pheromones. Same as we used for live hostage scenarios overseas. He produced a Remington 870 shotgun from one of the Suburbans, checked the chamber, and loaded a single blank round. Fair warning, Nash said. This is going to be loud, real loud. If Boone isn't ready, we'll know immediately. Eli knelt beside Boone, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder. The muscle beneath was coiled tight. Ready. You don't have to do this, bud, Eli said quietly. But if you want to show them who you really are. Boone's eyes were locked on Nash, but there was no fear in them now. Just focus. The kind of absolute concentration Eli had only seen in operators about to breach a door. Nash walked 20 paces back, raised the shotgun, and called over his shoulder. Everyone ready? Eli gave a thumbs up. Vickers nodded. The instructors pressed their hands over their ears. Nash pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the morning quiet like a sledgehammer through glass. The sound echoed off the plywood walls, rolled across the open ground, sent a flock of crows screaming into the sky. In the distant kennels, dogs started barking. The instructors flinched despite their ear protection. Boone didn't even twitch. Then Nash gave that same sharp whistle from before. One note, clear as a bell. The kind of sound that cut through gunfire and chaos and the fog of war. Boone was already moving. Eli had seen working dogs before, had trained them, had watched them perform at the highest levels of civilian K-9 work. This was something else entirely. Boone flowed across the ground like liquid shadow, low and controlled, reading the terrain with an intelligence that made Eli's breath catch. No hesitation, no confusion, just pure operational focus as he cleared the first building with movements too precise to be instinct alone. He paused at the entrance, scanned left and right in smooth arcs, then entered with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of muscle memory carved deeper than bone. Watching him work was like seeing a master craftsman return to his tools after years away. He checked corners with systematic precision, dismissed decoy scents without breaking stride, navigated obstacles that would have slowed human operators. His body moved with the kind of economy that came from doing something 10,000 times until it became more reflex than thought. This wasn't the confused, struggling dog from the training yard. This was an operator running a mission. The observers stood in complete silence. Even the SEALs on the perimeter had gone still, watching with the focused attention of professionals recognizing excellence in their field. 30 seconds passed, a minute. The heat pressed down. Sweat ran into Eli's eyes. Then Boone emerged from the third building, moving at the same controlled pace, and positioned himself beside the doorway. Not sitting like a normal police dog would, standing at alert, one paw slightly forward, weight balanced, ready to engage or retreat depending on orders. He didn't bark or signal, just stood guard with the quiet authority of someone who'd done this in places where barking would get everyone killed. "Sweet Jesus," one of the instructors whispered. Nash walked toward the building, his movements deliberate and measured. He disappeared inside for what felt like an eternity. When he emerged, he was shaking his head in something that looked like amazement. He didn't just find it, Nash called out to the group. He identified the most defensible position in the building, checked for secondary threats, established overwatch on the primary approach route. He looked at the gathered observers with something approaching awe. That's not search and rescue, that's tactical operations at the highest level. Nash approached Boone, who remained at his post until given a subtle hand signal to stand down. Only then did the dog relax, trotting over to Eli with something approaching pride in his posture. For the first time since they'd been paired, Boone leaned into Eli's touch, accepting the praise like he finally understood he'd earned it. "He doesn't need me anymore," Nash said quietly, watching the reunion. "But I think he's found someone new to trust." Eli ran his hands through Boone's fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath, feeling the controlled breathing of an operator coming down from a successful mission. The scars under his fingers told stories of sacrifice, of loyalty that transcended survival instinct. "What happens now?" Eli asked. Nash adjusted the shotgun on his shoulder. "Now you stop treating him like he's broken and start treating him like the hero he is." The walk back to the main complex felt different. Boone moved at Eli's left side, not quite at heel position, but close enough to matter. His head was up. His stride was confident, like something had clicked back into place. Some fundamental part of his identity that had been buried under 18 months of confusion and loss. The other handlers watched them pass with expressions that ranged from shock to something approaching reverence. Officer Martinez stood near the training yard, his own German shepherd sitting at perfect attention. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Whatever words he'd been planning felt insufficient for what they'd just witnessed. Nash met with Vickers in her office while Eli waited outside with Boone. Through the window, Eli could see them talking. Nash's hands moving in precise gestures. Vickers listening with the intensity of someone receiving information that changed everything. After 20 minutes, Nash emerged. "Walk with me," he said to Eli. They headed toward the parking lot, Boone padding between them. The afternoon sun had turned the asphalt soft enough to stick to boot soles. "I didn't come here just to evaluate Boone," Nash said. "I came to give you a choice." Eli waited. "Option 1, Nash continued. "I take Boone with me. I've got a ranch in Wyoming. 20 acres. Quiet. He can retire, live out his days chasing rabbits and sleeping in the sun. No pressure, no expectations. Just peace." It sounded like heaven, like everything a traumatized war dog could possibly need. "And option 2, oh," Nash stopped walking, turned to face Eli directly. "Option 2 is you keep him, but you prove to me and to Vickers and to everyone who's written him off that he can function in civilian canine work, that he can find a new purpose that honors what he was without demanding he becomes something he's not." "How long do I have?" 48 hours, Nash said. 2 days to design a demonstration that shows Boone's capabilities in a way that makes sense for this world. Not a combat simulation. Something that proves he can still serve, still matter, still be the operator he was trained to be, just in a different context. Eli looked down at Boone. The dog sat between them, amber eyes moving from one man to the other like he was following a conversation he couldn't quite understand but knew was important. "And if I can't," Eli asked. "Then I take him home," Nash said simply. "And he gets the retirement he's earned. Either way, he's taken care of. But the choice is yours." Eli thought about his grandfather, about the way Samuel had struggled after Korea, the nightmares, the distance, the way he'd sit in his workshop for hours doing nothing, just existing in the silence. And then Blue had come into his life, given him purpose, given him something to protect and care for and be responsible to. Samuel hadn't needed retirement. He'd needed a mission. "Some warriors can't retire," Eli said quietly, echoing words that felt like they'd been living in his chest since his grandfather died. "They don't need an ending. They need a new mission." Nash's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Recognition, maybe, or approval. 48 hours, he repeated. Show me what he can be. There was no ceremony when Nash left. No medals or formal recognition. Just a firm handshake and a quiet word before the SEALs loaded back into their Suburbans. He picked you, Nash said simply. That whistle I used, it was a reset command, designed to activate his training protocols under specific circumstances. But when I gave the stand down signal, he chose to come to you instead of me. Eli looked down at Boone, who sat calmly at his side. What does that mean? It means he's ready to move forward with a partner who sees him for what he is, not what he used to be. Nash paused. Cross would have liked you. You've got the same patience, the same way of seeing what others miss. The Suburbans rolled out as quietly as they'd arrived, leaving behind a training facility that would never look at failure the same way again. Eli stood in the parking lot watching them disappear into the desert heat shimmer. Boone pressed against his legs, solid and warm and present. 48 hours. 2 days to prove that a broken system hadn't broken an unbreakable dog. That night, Eli sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open and a legal pad covered in scratched-out notes. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the occasional sound of neighbors through the thin walls. Boone lay on the floor beside him, head on his paws, watching with those amber eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. Eli had called Dr. Rebecca Moss an hour ago. She'd answered on the second ring, listened to the whole story without interrupting, and then said 5 words that changed everything. I know exactly what to do. Now his legal pad was filled with her suggestions, his own ideas, modifications, and adjustments that might work. The ghost run that Nash had demonstrated was perfect for showing Boone's capabilities, but it was also clearly a military exercise. What Eli needed was something that honored those skills while translating them into a civilian context. Something that proved Boone could serve in this world, not just survive in it. Dr. Moss had suggested using stress pheromone markers, the same kind they'd use in actual search and rescue operations. Real-world application of military training. Eli sketched out a course layout, not a mock combat village, but a disaster scenario, collapsed structures, multiple scent signatures, decision points that would test Boone's ability to prioritize and assess, the kind of situation where his tactical training would be an asset, not a liability. His phone buzzed. A text from Vickers' budget committee watching this. Make it count. No pressure. Eli looked at Boone. The dog hadn't moved in the past hour, but he wasn't sleeping. Just waiting. Patient. Ready. You and me, bud, Eli said quietly. 48 hours to show them who you really are. Boone's tail thumped once against the floor. Just once. But it was enough. The next morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after sleepless nights spent making impossible decisions. Eli pulled into the complex at 5 in the morning when the air still held that brief coolness, and the mountains were silhouettes against the sky just beginning to lighten. Doctor? Moss was already there, leaning against her truck in the parking lot, holding 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, handing him one. Too much to do. They walked to the mock village together, Boone padding silently between them. Over the next 2 hours, they transformed the space, removed the obvious military markers, added collapsed plywood to simulate earthquake damage, set up scent markers that mimicked trapped victims, created something that looked less like a combat zone and more like a natural disaster. The key, Dr. Moss said as they worked, is showing that his training translates, that what made him elite in one context makes him valuable in another. By 7, other handlers were starting to arrive. Word had spread. The dog who'd been written off was getting one last chance, and everyone wanted to see whether he'd fail spectacularly or prove them all wrong. Officer Martinez showed up with his German Shepherd. Officer Thompson brought coffee for the other observers. Even Officer Reeves, the young handler who'd mocked Eli's struggles, stood at the fence line with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been hope. Sergeant Vickers emerged from her office at 8 sharp, clipboard in hand. Behind her, 3 men in suits. The budget committee. Great. Eli walked over to her. They're not here to help, Vickers said quietly. They're here to make sure we're not wasting federal resources on lost causes. Understood. Harlow, she met his eyes. I'm pulling for you, but I can't protect you if this goes sideways. I know. At 8:30, Eli positioned Boone at the start line. The dog looked up at him with those amber eyes, and for a moment Eli saw what Nash must have seen. What Cross had known. Not a pet, not even just a working dog. A partner. A warrior. Someone who'd proven his loyalty in the worst possible circumstances and was asking for nothing more than a chance to prove it again. Eli knelt beside him. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "This isn't about them. This is about showing the world what you've always been, what you'll always become." He stood and looked at the gathered crowd, at Vickers in the budget committee, at the handlers who doubted, at Dr. Moss who believed. Then he looked at the course, at the challenge waiting. "Ready?" he called to Vickers. She nodded. Eli took a breath, looked down at Boone one more time, and gave the signal. The signal was simple, just a hand gesture. 2 fingers pointed forward, then swept left. The same motion Cross had used 47 times in places where words would get you killed. Boone's transformation was instantaneous. His posture shifted, shoulders squared, head lowered slightly, eyes laser-focused on the course ahead. Every muscle in his body coiled with controlled energy, like a spring compressed and waiting for release. This wasn't the confused dog who'd stumbled through basic drills for 4 weeks. This was something else entirely. Something that made the observers go quiet. Something that made even the budget committee members lean forward. Eli gave the release command. Boone moved. He covered the first 20 yards in smooth, measured strides. Not the frantic sprint of an excited dog. The controlled advance of an operator entering hostile territory. His head swept left and right in precise arcs, covering sectors, checking angles, processing information faster than conscious thought. The first obstacle was a partially collapsed plywood structure designed to simulate earthquake damage. Multiple entry points, multiple scent sources, a decision tree that would confuse most dogs. Boone paused at the perimeter, scanned, then chose the western entrance without hesitation. Inside, Eli knew there were 3 scent markers. 2 were decoys. One was the target stress pheromone that indicated a victim. 30 seconds later, Boone emerged and positioned himself at the southeast corner of the structure. Not barking, not pawing at the ground, just standing at alert, one paw slightly raised. The signal Cross had taught him. Target acquired. Dr. Moss checked her notes, then looked up at Eli with wide eyes. She mouthed 2 words, "He's right." The budget committee members were writing on their clipboards. Boone waited at his position until Eli gave the next signal. Then he moved to the second obstacle. This one tested judgment under pressure. Dr. Moss had set it up based on Nash's suggestion, a simulated threat scenario. A mannequin positioned behind debris holding what looked like a weapon, actually a modified training baton with scent markers. Most police dogs were trained for binary responses, alert to the threat, or engage it. But military operators like Boone had been trained for something more nuanced. Proportional response. Threat assessment. The difference between neutralizing and eliminating. Boone approached the scenario and stopped. For 5 seconds, he assessed. Head tilting slightly, processing. Then he moved. He didn't attack the mannequin, didn't bark or show aggression. Instead, he circled behind it, grabbed the baton in his jaws, and pulled it free from the mannequin's grip with surgical precision. He carried it 20 feet away, dropped it in a designated safe zone, then returned to position. The watching handlers went silent. "Jesus Christ," Officer Martinez whispered. "That's level 5 threat assessment. My dog would have just attacked or alerted. Boone just disarmed it." Nash, watching from the perimeter, allowed himself a small smile. That was pure Cross. That was Ghost Protocol. Minimum necessary force, maximum tactical intelligence. The budget committee members were writing frantically on their clipboards. The third obstacle was the crucial one. The test that would prove whether Boone could do more than just follow trained patterns. Whether he could think, adapt, make decisions under pressure. Dr. Moss had set it up specifically for this, a collapsed concrete tunnel with 3 possible entry points. Inside were 5 scent markers, 3 victims, 2 threats. A real disaster scenario wouldn't have convenient labels. Wouldn't tell you which scents to prioritize. You had to assess, decide, act. Boone approached the tunnel system and stopped. For 10 seconds, he stood completely still, just breathing, processing, running calculations that Eli couldn't begin to understand. Then he moved. He bypassed the first 2 entry points entirely, chose the third, disappeared into darkness. The observers held their breath. 45 seconds passed. A minute. The New Mexico sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and heavy. Then Boone emerged from an exit point that Eli hadn't even realized existed, a gap between 2 concrete slabs barely wide enough for the dog to squeeze through. He positioned himself, gave the signal, then moved 10 feet to the left, gave it again, then moved another 15 feet. A third time, 3 victims, 3 locations. Prioritized by accessibility and threat level. The budget committee members had stopped writing. They were just staring now. Sergeant Vickers' expression had shifted from professional neutrality to something that might have been pride. But Eli wasn't watching them. He was watching Boone. Because the dog had done something extraordinary. He hadn't just found the targets. He'd mapped the entire scenario, assessed which victims were in immediate danger, which ones could wait, which ones were accessible, and which ones would require specialized extraction. He'd done in 90 seconds what would take a human team 15 minutes of planning. Dr. Moss walked over to Eli, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not training. That's intelligence. That's problem solving at a level I've never seen in a working dog. The fourth obstacle was a maze of concrete barriers with multiple paths. Only one led to the target. The others led to dead ends or decoy scents designed to confuse and frustrate. Eli watched Boone work the problem. The dog entered the maze, disappeared behind the barriers. For 90 seconds there was nothing. Just the sound of wind across desert sand and the scratch of pens on clipboards. Then Boone appeared at the exit point on the far side. Positioned himself. Same signal, same absolute certainty. Officer Thompson shook her head in disbelief. 20 years of experience, and she'd never seen anything like this. The final obstacle was pure theater, and Eli knew it. But it was also necessary. A simulated crowd scenario. Recorded sounds of people shouting, crying, calling for help. Visual distractions. Chaos designed to overwhelm and confuse. Most dogs would freeze or panic or default to the loudest stimulus. Boone walked through it like he was walking through a quiet room. He ignored the speakers' blaring crowd noise, dismissed the visual distractions, went straight to the actual scent marker hidden beneath a pile of debris, positioned himself, and waited for confirmation. When Eli gave the recall signal, Boone returned to heel position with the same fluid precision he'd shown entering the course. The entire demonstration had taken 11 minutes. 11 minutes to prove that failure was just a matter of using the wrong measuring stick. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Officer Martinez started clapping. Slow at first, then Thompson joined him. Then Reeves, then every handler at the fence line was applauding, and even the budget committee members were nodding to each other with expressions that said they'd just witnessed something they hadn't expected. Vickers walked over to Eli's clipboard tucked under her arm. Well, she said, I think that answers the question. One of the budget committee members approached. Late 50s gray as suit, the kind of face that had spent decades telling people no. That was impressive, he said. But I have to ask, what exactly would you do with him? We can't send a dog like this on police calls. He's overqualified for standard K9 work. It was Dr. Moss who answered. That's exactly the point, she said, stepping forward. Boone isn't a failure, he's a specialized asset. What you just witnessed isn't standard K9 capability. It's elite search and rescue. Disaster response. The kind of skill set that saves lives in situations where standard protocols don't apply. She pulled out a folder from her truck and handed it to the committee member. I've been researching military working dog transition for 3 years. There are currently 47 dogs in the federal system with similar backgrounds, all of them listed as failed prospects or behavioral problems. All of them actually suffering from the same issue. They're being evaluated against standards that don't account for their actual capabilities. The committee member opened the folder, started reading. What are you proposing? A pilot program, Dr. Moss said. Military to civilian K9 transition protocol. Use Boone as the template. Identify other dogs in the system who are struggling, not because they're broken, but because they're being asked to forget everything that made them exceptional. And do what with them? Retrain them for specialized civilian roles. Disaster response, veteran PTSD support, high-risk search and rescue, roles where their advanced training is an asset, not a liability. The committee member looked at Boone, then at Eli, then back at the course the dog had just demolished. How long would this pilot program run? 6 months, Dr. Moss said. 12 dogs, measurable outcomes. If it works, we expand. If it doesn't, we've learned something valuable about how to better serve transitioning military assets. And the cost, Vickers spoke up, less than what we're spending now on failed placements in medical retirements. These dogs are already in the system. We're just reallocating resources we're already spending. The committee member closed the folder, looked at his colleagues. Some silent communication passed between them. We'll need a full proposal by Monday, he said. But preliminarily, this has merit, especially if it reduces waste and improves outcomes. He handed the folder back to Dr. Moss, then extended his hand to Eli. Good work, Officer Harlow. That dog of yours just might have changed policy for the entire federal K9 system. They left 20 minutes later, black sedans disappearing into the desert heat shimmer. Vickers waited until they were gone, then turned to Eli with an expression that might have been the closest she ever came to a smile. You know what you just did? Kept my job. You just proved that the most expensive mistakes are the ones we make when we give up too soon. She looked at Boone. That dog was 3 days from euthanasia. Now he's the foundation for a federal program that could help dozens of animals. She paused. Cross would be proud. The name hung in the air like a blessing. Eli knelt beside Boone, ran his hands through the dog's fur, felt the steady heartbeat beneath, felt the scars that told stories of loyalty beyond reason, of sacrifice that transcended survival instinct. We did it, bud, he said quietly. We actually did it. Boone lifted his head, meeting Eli's eyes with steady focus. No confusion now, just understanding. The look said everything that needed saying. The next 3 months passed in a blur of activity that felt like building something from nothing. Dr. Moss secured temporary funding through a federal grant. Vickers allocated space at the complex for the new program. Eli found himself promoted from struggling handler to program coordinator, a title that came with more responsibility and not much more pay, but felt like vindication nonetheless. They identified the first cohort of dogs, 12 animals scattered across the federal system, all with similar stories. Military backgrounds, handler deaths or retirements, behavioral flags that read like trauma symptoms if you knew how to look. A Belgian Malinois in Montana who'd served 3 tours in Iraq and now wouldn't respond to male handlers. A German Shepherd in Colorado who'd lost her handler to suicide and had stopped eating for 6 weeks. A Dutch Shepherd in Wyoming who'd survived an IED blast and now panicked at loud noises. All of them written off as lost causes. All of them actually just waiting for someone to understand their language. Boone became the template, the proof of concept. Handlers came from other facilities to watch him work, to learn the protocols that Dr. Moss and Eli had developed. Not forcing the dogs to forget their training. Not demanding they become something they weren't. Just finding new contexts for old skills. The Belgian Malinois from Montana was paired with a female handler who'd served in the Air Force. Within 2 weeks, the dog was performing advanced search patterns in simulated disaster scenarios. The German Shepherd became a PTSD support animal for a veteran support group. Her handler reported that she seemed to know which veterans were struggling before they did themselves, positioning herself near the ones who needed her most. The Dutch Shepherd was trained for crowd security at public events. His hypervigilance, once considered a flaw, became an asset. He could detect elevated stress levels in crowds, identify potential threats before they escalated. One by one, the failures became success stories. Officer Martinez apologized to Eli in the break room on a Tuesday afternoon 3 months into the program. I was wrong about Boone, he said. About you. I've been doing this 20 years, and I thought I knew what a working dog looked like. Turns out I was just looking at it wrong. Officer Thompson was more direct. Command wants to know if you'd be willing to help develop trauma protocols for all incoming military dogs. Turns out there are more like Boone in the pipeline than anyone realized. Even Officer Reeves, the young handler who'd mocked Eli's struggles, approached him after a training session. My dog's good, he said, but he's not Boone. None of them are. What you did helping him find his purpose again, that's the kind of handler I want to be. The recognition felt good, but it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was watching Boone work with a group of veterans one afternoon 6 months after the demonstration, seeing him position himself next to a former Marine who was struggling with flashbacks, watching the way the man's breathing steadied when he put his hand on Boone's head, the way the tension drained from his shoulders. He knows, the veteran said quietly. Somehow he just knows. Eli understood then what Nash had meant, what Cross had known all along. These dogs weren't tools. They were partners, warriors who'd proven their loyalty in the worst possible circumstances and were asking for nothing more than a chance to keep serving, to keep mattering, to keep being the heroes they'd always been, just in a different theater of operations. The formal recognition came on a Friday in late autumn, 6 months after the demonstration that had changed everything. Federal Plaza, cameras, officials in suits making speeches about innovation and efficiency and cost savings. All the words that bureaucrats used when they wanted to take credit for something they'd initially opposed. Eli stood at the podium in a dress uniform he'd had to buy for the occasion, feeling ridiculous and out of place. Boone sat at his side wearing a new vest that identified him as Service Icon Federal K-9 Transition Program. The Secretary of Homeland Security presented Eli with a civilian medal for innovation in federal K-9 operations. Shook his hand, said something about leadership and vision that Eli barely heard over the pounding of his heart. But when the secretary knelt beside Boone, and clipped a medal to his vest. Eli's throat tightened. The medal was engraved with simple words, "In honor of service above and beyond." Nash was there. He'd driven down from Wyoming for the ceremony, standing in the back with his 3 SEAL colleagues. When it was over, he approached Eli with that same measured stride. "Cross would have been here if he could," Nash said. "Would have been proud as hell." He pulled something from his jacket pocket. Dog tags, worn brass on a chain that had seen better days. Lieutenant Daniel Cross, blood type O positive, Protestant. "These are his," Nash said. "Kept them after the funeral. Didn't know what to do with them." He pressed them into Eli's hand. "But I think they belong with you and Boone now. You're carrying on what he started." Eli looked at the tags. At the name of a man he'd never met but felt like he'd known through the dog that man had loved. "Thank you," he said, but the words felt insufficient. Nash just nodded. Then he knelt beside Boone, scratched behind the dog's ears the way someone who knew him would. "You did good, Ghost," he said quietly. "You found your way home." Nash stood and extended his hand to Eli one final time. "This isn't goodbye," he said. "You'll see me around. Program's going to need consultants who understand what these dogs have been through." He paused. "What we've all been through." "I'd like that," Eli said. Nash started toward his truck, then turned back. "Harlow, one more thing." His voice carried that command presence that made people listen. "Cross used to say that the best handlers weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who never gave up on their partners, even when everyone else did." He looked at Boone, then back at Eli. "You're one of the good ones. Don't forget that." The truck pulled away, dust rising in its wake. Eli watched until it disappeared around the bend, then looked down at the dog tags in his hand. Lieutenant Daniel Cross, O positive, Protestant. "Time to take these home," Eli said to Boone. That evening, Eli drove to the cemetery where his grandfather was buried. The sun was setting, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of copper and gold. The mountains stood dark against the horizon. The air had finally cooled to something approaching comfortable. Samuel Reed's headstone was simple granite. Name dates, and beneath them, Korean War veteran, 1950 to 1953. Eli knelt in the grass beside it, Boone sitting at attention next to him. He placed Cross's dog tags on the headstone next to the small American flag that someone refreshed every Memorial Day. Metal against stone, catching the last light of the sun. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "I understand now. What you tried to teach me about Blue, about purpose, about how some warriors never really retire." Boone pressed against his leg, solid and warm. "You were right. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding that broken things can rebuild stronger. That scars are just proof you survived something that tried to destroy you." The wind moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves, carrying the scent of sage and dust. "Boone didn't need fixing," Eli continued. "He needed someone to understand his language, to see him for what he was instead of what the world wanted him to be." He stood, slowly placed one hand on the headstone. "The program's working. 17 dogs transitioned so far. 0 failures. We're changing how the system handles military K9s, making sure no one else falls through the cracks the way Boone did." Boone stood too, moving to position himself between Eli and the lengthening shadows. Still protecting, still loyal. Still a warrior, just fighting different battles now. "Heroes don't retire," Eli said, echoing words his grandfather had lived by. "They just find new ways to serve." The sunset deepened to crimson and purple. The first stars appeared in the eastern sky. Eli and Boone walked back to the truck, together, their shadows long on the ground. The dog moved at his left side, close enough to matter, far enough to maintain his dignity. The limp from his shrapnel wounds was barely noticeable now. Just a slight hitch in his stride, a reminder of battles fought and survived. They drove back to the complex as night settled over New Mexico. The temperature had finally dropped to something comfortable. Stars were appearing in the eastern sky, bright and clear in the desert darkness. Eli's phone buzzed as he pulled into the parking lot. A text from Dr. Moss' program approved for national expansion. 47 more dogs identified. "You ready?" He looked at Boone in the passenger seat. The dog sat at attention, watching the road ahead, scars visible in the dashboard light, but eyes bright with purpose. Eli typed back, "Mission continues." Dr. Moss's response came immediately, always does. In the distance, Eli could see the lights of the complex, the kennels where new intakes would arrive tomorrow, the training yards where more stories would unfold, the mock village where more demonstrations would prove that failure was just a matter of using the wrong measuring stick. He thought about Cross, about Nash, about his grandfather, Samuel, and Old Blue, about all the warriors who'd come home carrying invisible wounds and found their way back through service. Boone had taught him something profound over these past months, that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding new purpose, new missions, new ways to honor what you'd been while becoming what you needed to be. The system had called Boone a failure, had given up on him. Had been 3 days from putting him down when Eli had first walked into that kennel and seen something everyone else had missed. Not a broken dog, a warrior waiting for someone who spoke his language. "Come on, bud," Eli said, opening the truck door. "We've got work tomorrow." Boone jumped down and fell into step beside him. Not quite heel position, he'd never be that dog, but close enough to matter. Close enough to say, "I'm with you." They walked toward the complex together, two warriors who'd found each other across the divide of loss and bureaucracy and systems that didn't understand what they'd been through. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and Boone's ears swiveled toward the sound alert but unconcerned. The mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time since Eli had met him, Boone's stride was confident. His head was high. His purpose was clear. Not because he'd forgotten who he'd been, but because he'd finally remembered that warriors don't need endings. They need new missions. And he'd found his.